Kelly, what was the first game you remember playing that had like profanity or some sort of adult content in it?
Adult content. Leisure Suit Larry.
Oh, yeah. Leisure Suit Lab. That might be my first as well. We might have the same first. We lost our adult game virginity to the same person,
Yeah,
same
that,
game.
that Larry, he gets around.
Larry. And weirdly, much later in life, I made my now wife a huge Leisure Suit Larry fan. They put out a Leisure Suit Larry game, which is very different than the PC games for PlayStation 2. I don't know if you ever played that one.
No.
It is a fun game, but it's very different than the PC experience. It's more like honestly, it's more like a Wii mini game compilation is how it plays, but with very adult themes that could never be on Wii. I actually like the game, but I understand why a lot of fans didn't enjoy it just because it's a big shift from the original series. But that was probably my first one, and then of course, me and my friends be like, we have to find more stuff like this. This is stuff we're not supposed to see. We need to see as much of it as we can. So going down a rabbit hole of like more adult PC titles, and it really wasn't until much later that in my limited purview that we saw that kind of thing popping up on consoles. So I was really surprised to find out through this video that will be linked somewhere through that video that Nintendo of all consoles is credited as being the first console to have a game with the word in it. Did you know about this?
No, not at all. If you'd asked me who I would not have guessed. Nintendo would have been the producer of it. I would not have guessed that it was on the Famicom. This would also been not the platform I would have thought it would have been on. And so yeah, every element of this surprised me.
Yeah, I was very shocked by this. And it makes sense. I mean, if you're gonna go with Nintendo of that era, it makes sense it was on Famicom and not NES. Because apparently, from what the video is kind of explaining, and I did a little bit, just the most bare bones minimum amount of research after the fact that you could do on this. It seems, in everybody's opinion, that this was a translation thing, that they were just trying to, something like edgy and exciting to throw in there and didn't really understand how far into that they were treading. This was just a misunderstanding of the word, is how that was thrown in there. So Famicom took discs, just like floppy disks, in addition to cartridges, just like Master System did. Genesis's or Sega's Famicom slash NES battling system. Um, it took discs, and this gives you an exclamation to put the other disc in when you finish up. And it seems like it wasn't intentional. And again, there was already like adult content on PCs, but PCs were kind of the Wild West. Pretty much anybody could publish on there. It wasn't as controlled as the way consoles were. And consoles were like that for a number of reasons. It wasn't just the censorship that, especially Nintendo, much less so Sega, but still Sega a little bit here and there, but much more so Nintendo. It wasn't just for censorship, them controlling all of this. There was also, they were coming out of the video game crash that Atari did by just putting out anything, figuring everybody who has an Atari is going to buy this, and then getting to something like ET and making more games than there are systems, because they were like, everybody's going to want to buy two. Let's make two of them. And who cares if the game is finished? Just put it out. And that kind of like insane mentality, that having some sort of quality control was the only way to kind of keep this thing on the tracks. So I don't 100% blame Nintendo. There is interesting things though, particularly in the Japanese versions of certain games. One that always gets me. Are you familiar with Kid Dracula?
Familiar, yeah, a little bit.
So Kid Dracula is a spin-off of the Castlevania series where you play as the popular Castlevania character Alucard as a kid fighting different monsters, and it all has like a very cutesy kind of look to it, but the gameplay is still hard. The way that maybe not quite as much as Castlevania. and as punishing as that could be at times, the gameplay is still difficult. Though it's not a kid's game; it's more the overall look of it. But if you play the original Famicom version of Kid Dracula, now it is, and the reason I stress original because if you play it now, most of what you'll find on emulators and what you'll find in the official collections that have been released, the Konami collections, have been censored. The first boss has a swastika on them in the original Famicom game, and if you can find the ROMs of that version of it, which aren't that hard to find. You just have to know that you're looking for that specific version. That meant something different at the time when the in the area where that game was made, it wasn't a Nazi related thing. But when they went to localize that game for other regions, they were like, "Hey guys, you need to watch out with the swastikas there." So that got changed really quickly. So there is a lot of weird localization stuff, especially with Nintendo, and I think it comes from the fact that Nintendo was so giant that these games are being ported all over the world and stuff doesn't always translate.
Yeah, and this was, I mean, Nintendo's really, uh, one of their hallmarks is being really kind of disciplined, and we may or may not agree with some of the rules that they have and approaches they take around copyright and all that, but they run a pretty tight shop, and they go there, and so I just this is a rare moment where something slipped through the cracks where it was like, do something edgy. We want to, when you tell them to flip it to side B and insert it, do it kind of like the cool kids would, and so they probably did minimal research to go, maybe ran across Andrew Dice Clay. I don't know, but they said, oh, that's what you do. Read a Walking Dead comic with Negan in it. Said, well, that's apparently a commonly used word. But yeah, a bit of a surprise. So this is a really cool video. I'm glad you found it. I'm sure we'll get a mention again if we eventually do. And there are these episodes that Mike wants to do for the show that probably will never see the light of day if I have my way. One of them involves an Atari game. We don't need to go back into that. There's Hard Nose out there talking about it. Go back and check on that. And the other one was to have basically an episode that is, since I do all the editing, that I would be censoring 98% of the video because Mike thought that'd be funny. And so this fits in very well with the theme of that episode. So I'm sure you can talk a little bit about it.
And also, I do think it's worth mentioning. I don't think they brought it up in this video. I'd have to rewatch it to double check. Of course, they mentioned that nowadays profanity in games is pretty commonplace for M-rated games and things like that. Not family-oriented games, but there's plenty of mature titles out there. I don't know if you remember when we took off. Nintendo was kind of not prepared for that. Nintendo was coming off of a couple of failed consoles, and Nintendo 64, while it did well, and I personally have become a huge fan of it recently, thanks to Kelly for introducing me to that. Um, but it struggled behind Xbox and PlayStation. It didn't get those kind of numbers that those systems did. It still did well, but not like that. So nobody was expecting Wii to explode the way that it did, not even Nintendo, and they've admitted that themselves. So they were kind of unprepared for it, and a lot of the games were in their wheelhouse, very, casual, arcade style family games. So they did this campaign to try and lure because it's not like they took out PlayStation and Xbox. Wii was gigantic and it was the clear winner of that era of consoles, but PlayStation and Xbox are just monoliths at this point. So there was no taking them down, just, winning the battle, not the war kind of thing. But they wanted to, get as much of that market share as they could. And of course, that's how, business and capitalism works. So they wanted to lure away some of the more serious gamers. So they started the We Are Mature campaign. I don't know, We WII, get it? I don't know if you remember this, Kelly.
Vaguely.
Yeah, it was this campaign to intentionally introduce mature rated titles to the way to try to lure some people away. One of them was a House of the Dead spin-off game called House of the Dead Overkill, which at the time, I don't know if it still has it, but it was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most uses of the word in a video game ever. And so I think it would surprise people to know that that was also on a Nintendo console and on the Wii of all things. I don't think many people know about those games though, because that's just not how people thought of the Wii. And I don't think it brought a ton of people over. I recently pulled our Wii out of storage though and cleaned it up, and it still works. I'm happy to say, which is great because I have that HDMI upscaler, so it's working great with that. And I happen to have a copy of House of the Dead Overkill, which I still had, luckily. And I was playing it, and it is honestly jarring how much profanity is in the game. You can tell that they were just like, we're going to prove to people how edgy we are. Like somebody from Nintendo is like doing the exact opposite of what Nintendo normally does, and is like, you could fit at least 6 more F bombs in that sentence. It was
Yeah.
definitely the opposite day in Nintendo, and they were improving that title.
Yeah, and for you to you react and, and be put off balance, it's profound. So, it's
There is a
it's
couple of really solid games that came out during that, not to get off track, during that We Are Mature era, though. There's some good games, and it is a shame that they kind of are mostly overlooked because there was some decent games in there.
yeah, and a great use of the interface, the Force Unleashed uh type of stuff. I mean, that's when you can lightsaber with a Wii controller, makes all the sense in the world. So
I
it's a good
actually,
thing
you
to
know what?
do.
I was really surprised because my absolute favorite game was Resident Evil for Wii was Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, and of course House of the Dead works the same way, where it's a light gun shooter game, like an on rails arcade style game, which obviously Wii really lends itself to naturally. I was just surprised there wasn't more of those types of games for it.
Yeah, it would have made a lot of sense. But yeah, because it was a great controller, great kind of approach, and really opened the door too. Not so much down the We Are Mature line, but to me, just kind of the inverse of, hey, I'm going to get, those folks are already playing video games and doing that, and you're going to have a hard time with brand loyalty moving them across. But you have this whole other pool of people who have never been comfortable doing a
Yeah.
video game, who could get super comfortable with the Wii.
And
And
PlayStation and especially Microsoft, I would say even a little more so than PlayStation, had no interest in serving that market.
no, it's not a small market. I mean, you could you could do all right there, but
Yeah.
it it's not as sexy, I guess. But that's the way it goes.
But yeah, I did think that was interesting, and I don't think he brought it up there that at least for a time, Nintendo, in their effort to seem edgier, had the most profanity in a game ever. So it is fitting, I guess, that as far as consoles go, it started with them.
They were they were first to market and now hold the record for the market.
Yeah.
So they own the F bomb.
And yet they're still always going to be seen as the kind of straight laced straight man of the video game world.
Well, if you folks have enjoyed this content, Mike and I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Hit that bell to be notified when new content comes out. New content such as Hard No, the world's shortest podcast, published daily, available for free with your free subscription to Bog Panda. You can get it anyway, but subscribe. Um, and then we've got merchandise, which isn't free, but well worth the price. So you should take a look at the
It's
really
not free, but
cool.
it might as well be for the value you're getting out
That's
of it.
right. Yeah. The lifelong rewards basically make it free. I mean, your numerators and denominators, the math works out. Trust us. But it'll feel like you're spending money, and when you see something on your credit card, it'll really feel like you're spending money, but you're not.
But
So
you're not. Yeah.
Bog Panda.